You've had some bad words to say about him at times over the years. What do you think about Colby?
After a while, no matter how much you hate him, you at least got to respect him. I mean, the guy keeps winning fights, and he's a tough dude.
People want to pretend Colby can't fight. He's a real problem because that style of shit talking.
There was a time when Colby Covington was just another wrestler in the UFC, quiet, skilled, and dangerously close to being cut. But then, something changed. Overnight, he became the sport's most polarizing figure. MAGA hats, Oval Office visits, trash talk turned political theater. He went from unknown to infamous, trading silence for spectacle. Fans booed, fighters turned on him, and even his own teammates walked away. But the attention? It never stopped. Colby built a career not just on fighting, but on controversy. And as the lights got brighter, the man behind the persona began to disappear. What began as a survival move became an identity he couldn't escape. And now, years later, one question still lingers. Did Colby Covington become a star, or did he destroy everything just to be seen? Before we start, subscribe the channel to support our growth. Thank you. For the chaos, before the MAGA hats and press conference meltdowns, Colby Covington was just a name in the win column. No fireworks, no headlines, just a gritty wrestler grinding his way up the UFC rankings, respected but rarely remembered. Born in Clovis, California, Colby came from a working-class family and carved his path the hard way. Wrestling was his foundation, and he was good, very good. He earned All-American honors at Oregon State, won a national junior college championship, and trained at the highest collegiate level. The work ethic was undeniable. So was the discipline. But charisma, marketability, the UFC didn't see it. When Colby joined the UFC in 2014, his skill set was already razor sharp. He had pressure, cardio, and relentless takedowns. Fight fans who loved grappling appreciated him, but most of the crowd didn't. They saw another blanket wrestler. He'd grind out decisions, smother strikers, and leave little room for drama. His fights were more than headlocks. Colby was slowly becoming invisible. He racked up wins: Wang Anying, Mike Pyle, Jonathan Munier, solid performances, dominant grappling, but no buzz, no narrative, no spark. Despite a strong record, Covington remained buried on undercards, forgotten once the next knockout artist took the mic. By 2017, he was 7-1 in the UFC, and still anonymous. Then came the warning, a behind-the-scenes decision from UFC executives. Cut him, not for losing, but for lacking a marketable image. He was winning fights, but losing the crowd. And in Dana White's world, that's a death sentence. Colby knew it, he felt it, and in that moment, he realized something brutal about modern fighting. Being the best wasn't enough. Not anymore. You had to sell, you had to entertain, you had to give people something to remember. So Colby made a decision, a permanent one. He wouldn't be silent anymore. He wouldn't be overlooked. If the UFC wanted loud, he'd be deafening. If they wanted marketable, he'd make himself unignorable, even if it meant becoming the villain. October 28, 2017, São Paulo, Brazil. Colby Covington walks into the octagon to face Demian Maia, a jiu-jitsu legend and national hero. The crowd boos him, chanting, whistling. They don't like Americans here, especially not quiet, smug wrestlers trying to spoil the show. But Colby isn't rattled. In fact, he looks amused. 3 rounds later, Maia's face is a mask of blood. Colby has outstruck him, out-wrestled him, outworked him. It's one of the most dominant wins of his career. But it's not the performance that people remember. It's what happens after. The mic comes on. Colby steps to it. And with one smirk, he detonates his career. Brazil, you're a dump. All you filthy animals suck. The crowd erupts in fury. Boos rain down. UFC security surrounds him instantly, but it's too late. The moment is already viral. In 15 seconds, Colby goes from forgettable to unforgettable. The UFC sees it. So does the internet. Clips circulate. Headlines explode. Hate floods in, but so does attention. And Colby? He's grinning. He's finally figured it out. This is what the UFC wants. Not respect, reaction, not politeness, polarity. He had spent years trying to earn admiration. Now he realized hatred was faster. Colby returns to the U.S. and doubles down. MAGA hat, American flag, Trump tweets. His interviews are no longer about fight strategy. They're about America, loyalty, toughness, political purity. He crafts a character, but not a subtle one. He becomes chaos, an unrelenting, ultra-patriotic trash-talking machine who insults every country he fights in, mocks every opponent, and never breaks kayfabe. He begins attacking teammates, name-dropping celebrities, and posting photos with far-right influencers. MMA media is split. Is it real? Is it an act? But fans are tuning in. Love him or hate him, they're watching. It works. After defeating Rafael dos Anjos, Colby is awarded the interim welterweight belt. Dana White, who once considered cutting him, now sees $sign. Colby is suddenly headlining cards, doing media tours, getting booed out of arenas, but walking away with bonuses. He's no longer fighting in silence. He's the main event, the headline, the heat. But there's a catch, a dangerous one. This character doesn't turn off, not backstage, not at home, not in the gym. To stay relevant, Colby has to be this version of himself all the time. No breaks, no vulnerability, no cracks, because the second he blinks, the spotlight moves on. And then, that spotlight brought him somewhere no UFC fighter had gone before, straight into the White House. In July 2018, Colby Covington walked past Secret Service, stepped into the Oval Office, and shook hands with the President of the United States, Donald J. Trump. He held up his UFC interim belt, posed with Don Jr. and Eric, and smiled for the cameras. The photo would travel everywhere. MAGA world embraced him instantly. Finally, a fighter who tells it like it is. For Colby, this was the ultimate validation. He wasn't just a UFC contender anymore, he was a symbol. He'd built a character around American patriotism, and now the highest office in the land had made it canon. The visit was more than ceremonial. It was strategic. Colby began aligning himself publicly with Trump's messaging. His interviews were filled with political rhetoric about loyalty, toughness, the radical left, and how he was fighting for the real America. He wasn't just calling out fighters now, he was calling out journalists, politicians, even sports leagues. And it resonated. Conservative fans rallied behind him. Pro-Trump influencers promoted his fights. UFC viewers, who normally tuned out between bouts, started watching his interviews, his social media, his pressers, just to see what he'd say next. But the backlash grew just as fast. In gyms and locker rooms, Colby became toxic. Fighters didn't want to train with him. Teammates at American Top Team, like Jorge Masvidal, Dustin Poirier, Joanna Jędrzejczyk, began distancing themselves. What had started as hype had become personal. Colby didn't just build a villain persona, he tore apart relationships to protect it. The cost of the character was growing, but he couldn't stop now. The White House trip, the headlines, the viral clips, they kept him alive in the UFC's ecosystem. Win or lose, Colby was relevant. The character was feeding his career, even as it drained his personal life. By late 2019, the storm was fully formed. He was the most hated man in MMA, but also one of the most watched. And as the crowd's boos got louder, so did his next challenge. The belt had gotten him into the Oval Office, but it would take more than politics to survive the champion waiting for him in the cage. Every great villain has a turning point, the moment where the mask stops being a costume and becomes the face. For Colby Covington, that moment came not inside the octagon, but inside his own gym. American Top Team was more than a training center. It was a sanctuary. Champions trained there, legends were made there, and Colby had been part of that fabric for years. But after his rise, his transformation, and his growing political persona, the environment shifted. What started as trash talk bled into betrayal. He called out teammates during interviews. He mocked Dustin Poirier, took public jabs at Joanna Jędrzejczyk, called Jorge Masvidal a backstabbing bum. To the outside world, it was more showmanship, more fuel for the Colby machine. But to the people who saw him in the gym, it wasn't an act. Lines were being crossed. Trust was evaporating. The gym, once a place of brotherhood, now echoed with tension. Fighters began training at different times to avoid him. Coaches distanced themselves. The man who built an entire brand on team loyalty now stood alone. Dan Lambert, ATT's founder and Colby's longtime mentor, tried to keep the peace. But the boiling point came in 2020. ATT officially introduced a no trash talk policy for teammates, a rule so clearly aimed at Colby, it may as well have had his name on it. The writing was on the wall. Shortly after, Colby left ATT. Some said he was forced out. Others claimed it was voluntary. Either way, the message was clear. He had alienated the very system that built him. He set up his own private gym in South Florida. No shared mats, no shared corners, no shared respect. His team now consisted of bodyguards, boxing coaches, and security. The image of isolation became part of his brand. Bulletproof vest, aviator sunglasses, a man at war with everyone. And yet, he kept winning the war of relevance. His interviews were still viral. His quotes still echoed. He was still the heel that media couldn't look away from. But there was a cost. He had gone from team captain to social pariah, from promising prospect to exiled showman. And though the UFC loved the headlines, even Dana White began to admit he's not for everybody. Still, Colby pushed forward. He had one mission left, the undisputed welterweight title. The only problem? A silent, stoic champion stood in the way. December 14th, 2019, UFC 245. Colby Covington versus Kamaru Usman, a rivalry forged in fire, identity, and everything else the UFC usually avoids. Both fighters were elite wrestlers. Both had cardio that didn't quit. Both could grind opponents into dust. But only one of them had turned the lead-up into a culture war. Colby made it political, red hat, Trump references, claims that Usman, a Nigerian-American, was pretending to be from the streets. He attacked his accent, his background, even called him Marty Fake Newsman. It wasn't just trash talk, it was bait. Usman stayed mostly quiet. He let the silence do the damage. But inside the octagon, there was no silence. From the opening bell, they didn't grapple, they didn't clinch, they threw bombs. 5 rounds of pure violence, a technical, emotional slugfest that had commentators yelling and fans frozen. Colby hurt Usman early. Usman broke Colby's jaw in round 3, though Colby fought through it, refusing to quit. By round 5, it was still close. Then Usman landed a right hand that staggered Colby, then another, then a flurry. Colby fell. The ref waved it off, and just like that, the streak was broken. He didn't stay for the post-fight presser. No excuses, no apology. He vanished into the locker room with a broken jaw and no belt. For a moment, the character cracked, but only for a moment. Months later, Colby returned, louder than ever. He claimed the stoppage was premature. He said the media was biased, that the deep state was out to get him. The heel was back, and in 2021, he got a second chance. UFC 268, Usman versus Covington 2, New York City. Same stakes, same heat, but this time the fire burned colder. Both fighters respected the danger. Both had grown. Colby fought smarter, more composed. He even complimented Usman post-fight. For the first time, the mask slipped. There was a hint of humility, but it wasn't enough. Usman won again by decision. 2 chances, 2 failures, 2 fights that pushed Colby to the edge of greatness, but never let him cross it. And in the aftermath, fans began asking, what else is there? If the character doesn't get the belt, what does he stand for? Once upon a time, they were inseparable. Colby Covington and Jorge Masvidal, teammates, roommates, brothers in arms. They trained together, cornered each other's fights, even shared meals like family. In a sport built on ego, they found rare trust. But trust doesn't survive betrayal. And in the UFC, betrayal always sells. The split began slowly. A few tense interviews, Colby claiming Jorge didn't pay a coach, Jorge saying Colby changed. But behind the scenes, it was deeper. About loyalty, attention, and the spotlight that only one man could hold. As Colby's persona grew louder, Jorge's patience grew thinner. Then the trash talk turned personal. Colby brought up Masvidal's ex-wife, his kids, called him a deadbeat, called him a fake, a clown. The war was on. UFC 272, Covington versus Masvidal, a grudge match years in the making. The promo wrote itself. The build-up was venom. The fight? One-sided. Colby dominated. His wrestling smothered Jorge. The scorecards weren't close, but it wasn't about belts. It was about humiliation. And for Masvidal, losing the fight didn't settle the feud. 2 weeks later, outside a Miami steakhouse, Jorge ambushed Colby in the street, breaking one of his teeth, screaming about family, loyalty, and betrayal. Colby pressed charges. Jorge was arrested. What had begun in gyms and press conferences had now spilled into criminal courtrooms. Masvidal later said, "You talk about my kids, I'll find you anywhere." Colby, for the first time in years, looked rattled. Not in the cage, in real life. The bulletproof vest didn't help. Neither did the sunglasses. The mask was there, but the man behind it looked shaken. He had sold the fight, but had he sold too much? At first, the character gave him everything. It got him noticed, got him paid, got him a seat in the White House. But over time, the same persona that saved Colby Covington's career became the cage he couldn't escape from. By 2022, Colby was no longer seen as just a fighter. He was a walking brand. Bulletproof vests at weigh-ins, aviators indoors, always flanked by security, always in character. He never broke kayfabe, not in interviews, not in gyms, not even in courtrooms. What once felt like provocation now felt like paranoia. Fans started to see through it. Not all, all, but some. The gimmick had gotten old. The same jokes, the same slogans, the same routine. UFC audiences, known for short attention spans and hunger for authenticity, began to turn. They still watched, but fewer believed. And the UFC? It moved forward too. The welterweight division filled with new names: Shavkat Rakhmonov, Khamzat Chimaev, Belal Muhammad. Men who didn't rely on theater. Fighters hungry to climb, not protect personas. Meanwhile, Colby fought only once over a span of nearly 2 years. His presence remained, but his activity didn't. The UFC had trouble booking him. Opponents didn't want the baggage. Some hated the politics. Others didn't want to be part of the show. Colby became a high-risk, low-reward fighter. Dangerous in the cage, toxic out of it. Behind the sunglasses, fans began asking who was left. No gym, no true teammates, no post-fight humility, no character evolution. Just the same mask, the same performance. He had become a one-man act in a sport that constantly reinvents its stars. And while other fighters aged gracefully, building brands, coaching gyms, commentating fights, Colby remained frozen. He didn't coach, didn't mentor, didn't evolve. He stayed chaos. Even when the chaos stopped selling. Strip away the character, take off the hat, the vest, the headlines. What's left? An elite welterweight, an all-American wrestler, a man who pushed Kamaru Usman further than anyone ever had, a cardio machine with some of the best pace and pressure in UFC history. And yet, his resume remains incomplete. Colby Covington has never held an undisputed UFC title. His only belt, an interim strap, won in 2018, was stripped before he could unify it. His 2 undisputed title shots both ended in defeat. His high-profile feud with Masvidal, a dominant win, but no rankings climb. His 2023 title shot against Leon Edwards, a slow, uninspired performance, another loss. 3 cracks at gold, 3 missed legacies, and time is ticking. At 36 years old, he's no longer the hungry upstart. The new generation is younger, faster, less filtered, more versatile. The same way Colby once stormed in and made noise, others are now doing the same. But the bigger question isn't about belts or rankings. It's about memory. How will Colby Covington be remembered? For his talent or his tactics? For his wrestling or his rhetoric? For what he achieved or what he pretended to be? There's a tragic contradiction at the heart of Colby's career. He was too talented to be ignored, but he believed he had to become something else to be remembered. In doing so, he built a legacy that may never reflect who he truly was inside the cage. Fighters like Kamaru Usman, Tyron Woodley, even Jorge Masvidal, all became champions. Whether fans loved or hated them, they earned undisputed validation. Colby, he played the villain so well, he wrote himself out of the hero's story. And in the end, legacy is about more than belts. It's about belonging. And Colby, for all his talent, never truly belonged anywhere. At the height of his act, Colby Covington walked through fire. Boos so loud they shook arenas, death threats, online vitriol, locker room alienation, court cases, teammates turned rivals, rivals turned enemies. He embraced it all, wore it like armor, told the world he didn't care what anyone thought. But you don't build walls that thick unless something inside needs protecting. In private moments, away from cameras, away from chaos, those close to Colby have hinted at the toll, the mental fatigue, the emotional burnout, the pain of becoming the villain in a sport you grew up loving. He sacrificed normalcy for relevance, brotherhood for branding. And at times, you have to wonder, did he ever want to take it all back? We'll probably never know, because Colby has never broken character. Not once. Not in interviews, not in losses, not in pain. He's doubled down every time. Louder, more provocative, more extreme. But the spotlight doesn't last forever. And now, years later, the roar has quieted. The Twitter trends have moved on. The next trash talkers are younger, fresher. The UFC keeps rolling. And Colby, he's still here, but not quite present. He exists in a strange space. Not retired, not active, not revered, not dismissed. Famous, but not celebrated. Feared, but not respected. He got the fame. But the legacy? Still undecided. And that might be the most haunting part of all. Not that Colby Covington lost fights, but that he spent his career playing a role so completely, he never let the world meet the man behind it. Colby Covington didn't fail because he wasn't good enough. He was. He pushed champions to their limit. He built a fan base out of pure defiance. He turned boos into millions. But in choosing controversy over connection and image over identity, he isolated himself in a sport built on respect. He gave us a character we couldn't ignore, and a fighter we never really got to know. Now, as time moves on and the spotlight begins to fade, One question remains. Will Colby Covington be remembered as one of the best welterweights to never wear gold, or as a man who sacrificed greatness for noise? Because talent is temporary, fame is fleeting, but identity? That's forever. And when the cage door closes for the final time, all that's left is who you really are.